Also, following Hutchins and Schulman about this topic, to contribute to go beyond my own classroom and by unveiling what I've been doing, and by studying, also sharing it with other colleagues, and together being able to develop knowledge in the scope of teacher education. But one important idea that I would like to point out about this is that, as Hutchins and Schulman say, scholarship of teaching is not synonymous of excellent teaching. And I think this is a very important idea because, of course, as teacher educators, we are also learners because we are also engaged in a professional development process. So it implies that we go into a meta dimension, and that we also, and it's also important that we make this experience public, so that we can, together, as I was saying, with our peers, produce more important knowledge. So what I'm going to do today is a humble exercise of reflection about what I've been doing as teacher educator in the context of initial teacher education, language initial teacher education. So let me start with an assumption that has accompanied me since I did my doctoral thesis, actually here with Isabel as my supervisor. And when I started in 2001, there was something that I read that actually struck me at the time, and has been, it has been my partner all over this time. And I'm referring to the words by Moreira and Macedo, two Brazilian scholars in the area of curriculum and teacher education. And as they say, on peut dire que la théorisation du curriculum propose des formes de sélection et d'organisation des expériences d'apprentissage dans lesquelles les connaissances sont enseignées et apprises afin de produire certaines identités sociales et culturelles. Dans les cours de formation des enseignants et dans l'apprentissage qui a lieu dans la pratique d'enseignement, certaines identités professionnelles se forment également. Par conséquent, les programmes d'études contribuent à produire des sujets spécifiques, certains hommes, certaines femmes, certains enseignants, certains professeurs. Si les programmes scolaires font de nous ce que nous sommes, nous construisent comme nous devrions l'être, il est important de réfléchir aux identités produites par les programmes actuels, tant dans les écoles que dans les cours de formation des enseignants. C'est à nous de réfléchir aux identités que nous aimerions voir produites et aux mesures à prendre pour les produire. So these ideas are ideas that I'm going to somehow pinpoint as I go along my presentation, and they actually raise questions for teacher education, for the design of the curriculum of teacher education, and also for language education. So let me bring you some, share with you some concerns that we have been dealing with when we are talking about teacher education in general, but it's also an important topic, or these are important topics when we are talking about language teacher education. And I'm having as a reference these two handbooks, which are quite recent, that actually summarize many of the concerns in the field of teacher education, and that I think are important to bring to this conference, in order to discuss it a little bit better. So quelques questions pérennes. Well, one of them has to do with the quality of the teacher education processes. And this is something that is not new, but is always on our mind when we are talking about teacher education. Another issue has to do with the different visions that we have about what it means to become a teacher, and also the role of education and the role of school. And when we come across all these interpretations about what it means to be a language teacher, what it means to the role of language education and the role of school in that context, we'll see that across the globe, we will have different perspectives, although we also may find international trends that are somehow influencing the national contexts. Another issue, another issue is the diversity of models and perspectives, theoretical models and perspectives in terms of teacher education and professional development. And sometimes it is difficult to reconcile them, or at least to see the differences between them. We know that there are justice-oriented approaches. We know that there are more theoretical or practical-oriented approaches. And sometimes as a teacher educator, it's difficult when we are talking about how to design the curriculum of initial teacher education to make decisions about it. Another idea that I think may be important to bring about has to do with internationalization of teacher education, and how we are at the confluence of global influences and transnational forces in teacher education. In a recent study about globalization and teacher education, Payne and colleagues say that it's important in teacher education, and by regarding at globalization, that we look at how the movement of people, ideas, and policy actors across national borders has positioned teacher education and the intersection of global influences and transnational forces. So what they say is that when this is transferred to teacher education, and specifically language teacher education, it means that we need to be preparing teachers for the increasing diversity in the classrooms, given the rise of migration, for instance. Another idea that they highlight is that globalization also entails the movement of ideas across local contexts. So ideas of good teaching, and I'm quoting, ideas of good teaching and what this means for teacher education circulate with greater range and speed as a consequence of the heightened connections of globalization. And also, in parallel to this, we also have the rise of new mechanisms for trading and standardizing teacher education policies. So, with this in mind, there are other topics, and two of them are a very particular or specific concern to me. One of them has to do with the professional, the teacher professional identity in the context of teacher education, how to develop it or how to promote its development, how to study it and to study such development, how teacher identity dialogues with the subject matter that the teacher is teaching, how to, for instance, following Judith Sachs, how can we promote the construction of a activist, as she says, identity. So, as I was saying, in this context, I'm also concerned with the role of pedagogies, of specific pedagogies, some of them very dear to all of us, such as critical approaches, approaches that are relevant from the cultural and linguistic point of view, inclusive education, but also how we can integrate all this into more interdisciplinary practices in school. So these are overall some of the main concerns that we are dealing with in terms of teacher identity. There is a lot of information here, but I won't discuss it all. I just like to point out that when we are talking about the design of the curriculum of teacher education, there are also important questions that are rising. And I'm going to point out three of them. One of them has to do with the debate around which knowledge is considered important and which knowledge is considered formative for students and for student teachers. So if we take into account the idea that curriculum is a social, educational, and social pedagogical construction, it's important that we are aware of how experiences are, how people are experiencing learning within their trajectory, and how multiple social, educational, linguistic justices are actually taking place. Another idea that it's important when we are also discussing curriculum, not only in teacher education, but also in schools actually, is this ideological dimension. So considering this idea that curriculum is a social practice, it may be a social practice that is strengthening homogenization. And it's important to discuss to what extent is curriculum development, and in this context of teacher education, the way we design curriculum, to which extent are we as teacher educators giving our student teachers the opportunity to problematize, to analyze, to think about how the school curriculum is or not maintaining social injustice, educational injustice, curricular injustice, particularly when we are referring to different kinds of plurilingualisms. So let's say different identity trajectories of our students. And Julio Santomé is actually an author that strongly advocates towards this idea of critically analyzing the curriculum from this point of view. Another idea that I think it's important to highlight is that in terms of teacher education, sometimes it's difficult also to make decisions about how we can design the curriculum, what the reference is for the design of the curriculum. Is it the content? Is it the competences that need to be developed? Or can it be a combination of both? So how can we manage all this in teacher education when we are thinking about our disciplines, our subject matters in context of teacher education? And finally, as a background in terms of language didactics, I would like to say that in terms of language didactics and education in language, I'm actually positioning myself in the context of curricular didactics, so la didactique curriculaire. So I'm much more concerned with the didactic education, let's say, of student teachers in the context of citizenship education. And I've decided to bring to this talk a concept that it's, I think it's a challenging concept by Stroud, an African colleague, which is linguistic citizenship. And I will come to this in a moment. So there are some signs of inquietude. And if we take into account, you know, the different trajectories that plurilingualism as a theory, as a pedagogical practice has been undergoing. So some studies that we have been carrying out, not only abroad, but particularly in Portugal, have pointed out to a series of concerns in the Portuguese schools. One of them is the fact that students are experiencing mainly monolingual experiences in school. Teachers in schools, both language and subject matter, other subject matters teachers, are confronted with or are living very strong dilemmas in schools when they refer to their pedagogical work with multilingual classes. Also, linguistic and cultural diversity sometimes is the reason why there is so much inequity in school. And taking this into account, when we are working with teachers that are going to teach English as a foreign language, I think this is a challenge for all teacher educators that are working with teachers from all teachers from all languages, but particularly when it comes to English and considering its international role as a language of communication. I think when we are working with future teachers of English as a foreign language, this deserves special attention in terms of how we can help them to develop more complex ideas about language in the classroom, and communication. So this has been my job, let's say, that I've taken in the context of initial teacher education in a master's for teaching English in primary school, which is a professionalizing master degree with 90 CTS, and it takes 3 semesters. And particularly, I'm the teacher of 2 subjects, language, didactics, curriculum, and assessment in languages, so CAL, which takes place in the first semester of the program. And the other subject is pluralistic didactic approaches, which takes place in the 3rd semester of the course. So I meet the student teachers at the beginning of their program and also at the end. So also this gives me a very interesting idea about how they are progressing during the program, particularly when it comes to issues of plurilingualism and interculturality. Well, of course, these two subjects, they are thought of in terms of pedagogical principles. They are thought of as a continuum. So they are very interconnected. That's why I've chosen to display the contents all together. But just to say that the political dimension of language education is something that is transversal to the 2 subjects, and also the development of didactic projects for the English classroom as a foreign language at primary school. And then we deal with the topics that you've able to read there. So my approach in the context of this curricular didactics in initial teacher education and how I've been studying it has 2 purposes, I was saying, within this idea, as Jochen, for instance, has also mentioned, of the praxeological dimension of language didactics, and that has been also reinforced by Isabel, Helena Rojissá, Isabel Alarcão here in Portugal. So I have 2 purposes. One of them has to do with, I have research aims when I do this, but I also have, so in order to gain more insight about what is happening in terms of student teachers learning in the context of these 2 curricular components of their program, but I also have a more practical, let's say, formative objectives that have to do with meeting some needs in specific situations. So I cannot say that it's an action research process, but it's similar to it. So I'm kind of trying to understand the problems that are emerging from my own practice as teacher educator in order to be able to find solutions for them. Sometimes I can, sometimes I cannot. So let me say a little bit about my philosophy of education, and this actually is well, it started with ILTE, with the project that Isabel mentioned about intercomprehension in language teacher education, and it's actually part of my PhD thesis. But this is something that has guided me as I go along and as I've been evolving in this context. And just to say that my concern as teacher educator is the development of the student teacher, both as a professional, but also as a citizen, as a plurilingual and intercultural citizen. So these 2 dimensions have been, or at least I've been trying to, in the context of these two subjects, to promote this and to create more formative experiences to this. And so mainly I follow these three dimensions. So a political, social, ethical dimension of teacher education, a more personal dimension. So there is a strong focus on the student teachers as persons and their development, and also the connection with the professional, let's say, dimension that has to do with the more intervention or action of what they are doing. And this actually creates a triangle between what the society, school, and themselves as teachers. And always the idea is that they negotiate the meanings that they are making about themselves, but about language as their object, let's say, of teaching. Okay, so in terms of teacher education strategies, I've been working with two principles in how I've been organizing the trajectory, the learning paths in these two subjects. The principle of the relation with the reality, so how within this context I am promoting this connection to reality, and the other one has to do with the role of the teacher educator and the student teachers in the classroom and what has been happening. So both subjects follow these three categories, let's say, by two colleagues here, actually theorized by two colleagues here of Aveiro, Vieira and Vieira. And I've combined what they call strategies in the context of the abstraction of reality, which are mainly demonstrative, positive strategies. So I'm talking about reading tasks, about analyzing videos, about writing of narratives or critical reflections. But I'm also talking about presentations that I make through PowerPoint, for instance. In terms of simulations of reality, we have many situations of discussion and group work, for instance, where they have to analyze specific cases, realistic, reality-based cases, and we have to discuss about controversial themes, mainly regarding linguistic and cultural diversity in education. And they also have a project-based approach to what they are doing. And also they have situations that are what Vieira and Vieira describe as real-life situations that have to do with guided research that they have to undertake. So in terms of the aims of all this, I've actually combined them with a recent publication by Bleichenmacher and colleagues about teacher competences for language education. And I've combined them with a framework that I've been using, which is Schulman's professional knowledge model of teacher education, of teacher learning, sorry. And I would say that as a teacher educator, my main aims have been fostering student teachers' values and principles in terms of their professional dimension, particularly the ones that have to do with plurilingualism and citizenship in education. But in the context of these two subjects, it's not possible to have a direct connection with their teaching practicum, which is something that I would like to have, but because of how it is designed, it's not possible. So in terms of teaching competences, I'm mainly focusing on the development of their abilities to manage the curriculum in a flexible and more interdisciplinary way, and also in terms of the conception of the intervention. But also I'm trying to target collaboration competences, because we do follow many of the tasks and the activities are socially constructed. And I would like also to foster, or I've been trying to foster also their critical thinking about all the topics that I've been mentioning. So, in terms of research, let me give you an example of something that has been concerning me for some time, and that may be illustrated in these two questions. Les enseignements en formation construisent-ils un environnement de classe qui accueille tous les enfants, ses langues et cultures, ses voix, in terms of how they represent the English classroom, for instance. Et la classe est-elle comprise comme un espace de citoyenneté linguistique? And here is when I go back to Stroud's notion of linguistic citizenship. The author is, as I was saying, he's an African author, is actually talking about the African context, but I find that, and of course, in this context, when he talks about, and his colleagues, when he talks about linguistic citizenship, is referring to also the African challenges and characteristics, both linguistic, political, social, economical, and obviously in a very in a context of the colonial perspectives of language education and social linguistics and so on. But I found that this concept would be instrumental in the way that I would be looking at how student teachers are actually looking at the classroom and they are portraying their classrooms. So I'm going to move on because as we started a little bit late, I have less time now. But just to say also that combined with this idea of linguistic citizenship is another idea that's very important. It has to do with the voice of students, and to what extent students' voice is actually taking place in the classroom. And this is also important in terms of participation. Very recently, our National Council of Education issued a recommendation precisely focusing on students and young people voices in school education. And they identify 3 transversal dimensions regarding this idea of voice. En tant qu'instrument d'interaction, de participation et de l'appropriation des connaissances et l'engagement social. And so when I look at student teachers' representations of their classrooms, I tried to see to what extent they are actually picturing the classroom as a context of linguistic citizenship and as a context of voice, considering students' plural identities. So in order to do that, and I'll be very quick, in order to do that, I've collected a corpus of 39 drawings and their corresponding explanations over, as you can see, from 2016 to 2020 of 13 future teachers. And there were different instructions for the drawings according to the phase they were in the program. And I think that you very quickly can see that the instructions were very much targeting teachers' identity, how they are resignifying their profession and the subject matter that they are teaching, but also how they relate all this to the English as a foreign language classroom. The drawings, they were, I applied the content analysis tactic in order to find that out and in order to find some answers to the questions that I've asked before. So in order to do that, I've 5 main categories emerged when I was analyzing the drawings. Let me say that first I tried to depict the drawings to see what was there. Then I crossed it with the written explanations to see if I was understanding everything correctly. And also in a second step or a third step, I try to make all that dialogue with the theoretical constructs that I had. And I can say that I can have two main themes as transversal to this analysis. One, the representation, les représentations de la communication des langues et cultures dans la salle de classe d'anglais, et les représentations à propos des activités, les tâches dans la classe. And why have I decided in this context to highlight this topic of the tasks in the classroom and the activities? Because as Guillemeno Sacristan tells, which is a very well-known scholar in the field of curriculum, tasks are micro contexts of learning in the classroom. They are actually the ones that organize everything that is happening in the classroom. So it's important when we look at them, and also in this case, to see the potential they have for, or the room they have for student voice. So in this case, I can say that there are two trends when we look at student teachers representations. One of them has to do with the salient presence of English as a foreign language in the classroom. Well, it is an English as a foreign language in the classroom, of course, and a very cultural dimension. But the issue here is that they depict, as you can see, at least in drawing one, that they depict a monolingual classroom, mainly with with English as a foreign language as the exclusive means of communication. So they tend to have a very homogenization perspective of the classroom. And if we follow Macedo, for instance, he would say that they have a colonialized view of English as a foreign language classroom. Okay. Although they also have the presence of an intercultural dimension and mainly of a citizenship perspective in the English classroom, along with this strong emphasis of English in the classroom. And this is portrayed in drawing, for instance, number 4, where they refer to all these colors and this like cultural diversity. There is an emerging representation of the English classroom where we can see a more striking dimension of students' voice. But this is very superficial at the end of the 3 years of the program. And this is what, of the 3 semesters, yes, of the, sorry, 3 semesters. So at the end of the master's degree. And this is what struck me most. And when I was actually looking at the drawings and also combining them with their written explanations, written narratives, I saw that they were conflicting with distinct discourses along the program. And this is complicated, actually. But I also think that this is also part of them becoming teachers, being able to reason about what they are listening and being able to become critical about what they are listening. But of course, if we think about teacher education also as a professional development process, we can see that each of them has their own timing in order, in terms of their meaning making. And this is displayed, let's say, in the 3 drawings from your right. As you can, they are all from the same student teacher, and they were done at the beginning of the first semester, at the end of the first semester, and this last one was at the end of the program. And this is actually the last, sorry, and I will, this was actually the last, the only drawing that I would say as a teacher educator would fulfill what we may call inclusive, plurilingual English as a foreign language classroom. Because this teacher, she is able to write, you cannot see that very well, but she's able to write what she considers to be her teaching principles, and they are very much aligned with everything that we have been discussing here. And as you can see in terms of classroom organization, you have students working in different tasks. They are using their own languages along with English. And at the right down corner of the drawing, you can see the teacher opening the door to the students' parents, and they are talking their language as well. So this is very different from everything else that we saw before, but it was the only drawing out of 39 that actually depicted it. So I think that as a teacher educator, this gives me something. And well, I guess I'm not able to conclude here, sorry, but I would like to say that, and as I said in my abstract, and perhaps we can discuss some of the conclusions in the debate. As I said in my abstract, I think that when we are discussing all these issues, which are very much complicated, very complex, because we are dealing with humans, of course, and everyone has their own trajectories, their own understandings, and so on. So I think that it's important when we when we embrace this idea, this paradigm of communication. And why am I saying this? In order to favor the interactions at different levels between researchers and other stakeholders of different places of the world, with the purpose of nourishing the development of knowledge, both in the fields of teacher education, curriculum, and language didactics. Also, in order to avoid the standardization of thinking and action, which I think is also very, very important, in order to ensure principles such as contextualization, dialogue, and co-creation, and finally also to favor a critical thinking about the ideas around more ecological and representative processes in language education. Thank you, and I'm sorry for not being able to say everything that I would.
Je crois qu'on n'a pas beaucoup de temps, mais au moins 2 ou 3 questions, si vous voulez les poser d'une façon rapide. Pas de questions.
Should I ask the question in English or in French?
Or in French, I can understand.
In
but
French,
I
that's fine.
Okay,
right. Alors, vous enseignez la didactique des langues, si j'ai bien compris, et vous avez parlé de l'objectif de considérer la classe d'anglais comme ou l'enseignement de l'anglais, l'enseignement professionnel de l'anglais comme un lieu de plurilinguisme. Et je me demandais comment vous articulez ça avec l'enseignement de l'anglais.
Je ne sais pas s'il y a encore d'autres questions. Bon, sinon la discussion va continuer. Merci.
Merci pour votre question. Well, it's I would say the core question of what we do when we are actually talking about a foreign language teacher, both even when I'm working with experienced teachers in schools and we are talking about this is a question that comes up all the time. And it's a very tough question, actually, and there are no recipes for it. But what of course, let me just clarify this. It is an English as a foreign language classroom. So the purpose is to learn English. But the purpose also is to educate students through English. And when we do that, Of course, one of the things that I always ask my student teachers is, do you as a teacher believe that we need to encourage pupils previous knowledge when they are learning a different language? And they all say yes. And when I say, well, do the languages that they have in their repertoires that are part of that trajectory, are they previous knowledge? And they say yes. So why don't you use them as a resource for them to learn English? And that's the question. And from the plurilingual point of view, for instance, this is something that I ask them to think about. And when they are planning their projects, they are asked to envision this possibility. How would I resort to my students' language in order to learn another language? Another idea is that it has to do with language contexts, which Isabel also has talked about in the classroom. So when you forbidden your students or your pupils to use their languages in the classroom, you are kind of denying something that is part of them. And it's not because they are actually talking other languages that they won't learn English. They have to understand when also, in terms of what's the purpose of them using other language in order to learn English. So this has to do with the kind of tasks they are asking students to do, for instance. But another idea is also, when you look at English, they also forget sometimes that English as a language is very diverse. And in their thinking, they mainly representate the British or the American variants of English, for instance. And they forget that there is another whole world that speaks English, and it's not the English, the British or the American variety. So there is also this work around the diversity of the English language and culture as well. Oh, I see. Okay.
Your work with the teachers who teach them English and who were basically trained in English teachers.
Oh, okay, I see. Well, I don't. But that has to do with institutional reasons. In this case, it's a contextual thing. In my case, okay. But let me just say that in the masters, they only have one course that is English as a foreign language. All the other courses, I forgot to say that, they are from pedagogy and teaching practicum. Okay, so they before they enrolled on the masters, they have a 3-year degree in English, language, culture, linguistics, and so on. And only afterwards, this is the Bologna model, so 3 years plus 2 or 1.5. And the masters for teaching is basically pedagogical, didactic, and internship.
Okay.
But it's a tough question there.
Merci Anne-Sophie. Je crois qu'il faut passer à la pause café, que les commentaires. Merci encore.